I see contempt as being like on the side of total cynicism about the good that others seek, the good that you can corporately be seeking together. Cynicism is, I think, a disbelief in the possibility of a common good. And I see everything we've been talking about here with real humility and leaders learning how to have more humility. The leader will let go of selfish motives and interests and make the collective, the common good, more the goal. But that's going to bring the entire team then closer together.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at optimwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimwork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Hey, Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Sharif, it's great to be back.
Yeah, Kevin, I thought it was finally time to finish off this series on humility with looking at the fourth stage from the research of Dr. John Gottman in the stages of the decline of relationships. And this one is contempt, but I hope we can keep it kind of optimistic. But before we dive into contempt, though, we wanted to circle back on last week's discussion, right, on some of the things around stonewalling.
Yeah, and I think that maybe I gave the impression, I'll take full responsibility for this.
I take none, yeah, exactly.
That this idea that the thoughts thinking themselves in our head, like the voice in our head, is the voice of our pride. Maybe some people I know felt overly convicted by that. And it wasn't meant to be some big indictment. It's just this simple idea that the default attention is inherently self-referential. It's going to be thinking about what are you needing next? What are you doing next? What are you planning? So it's just that it is more centered on predicting what you're going to need. That's not bad. That's the default. I mean, the default mode just does that. And so we really need the default mode to allow us to actually give our whole attention to work and to others that we bond with. Because in the background, it's just making sure that all the memories we need are ready for us. So it's good that the default mode do this. But it's also true that if we're ruminating, cogitating, worrying, that there is a self-referential quality that can really be highlighted. You know, and if we could think of immersing ourselves, grounding ourselves more in the present moment, more in life as it really is, a lot of those self-referential concerns can be quieted. And there's this idea that humility can be seen as a kind of activation of task attention and an anchoring of task attention so that one more and more is just in reality as you experience reality directly. You know, and you're not continually in unreality, which I mean, just thinking about things in your imagination. So, and that really fits with humility as truth, which is this add equation of your thoughts, your experience, and reality itself. So anyway, that was my main point in that, and that really fits with stonewalling, which is where instead of attending to the other and desiring to pay more attention to build that bond, we retreat from others. Yeah, and that leaves us more and more just on our own, kind of isolated from the others in our lives. And that leaves us more and more prey to these self-referential thoughts.
Yeah, okay, Kevin, I have some follow-up questions on that, but I want to get into contempt, but I would just like to take some responsibility because, I'm supposed to kind of keep you accountable and ask the tough questions, not let you get away with anything. And so I feel like I kind of failed in that duty.
Well, thank you, Sharif. That's very gracious of you. Yeah. And we're talking about, how do we overcome defensiveness? And you do it by taking full responsibility.
Right. Extreme ownership.
And that makes it easier for you to then have gratitude for other people.
Right. So now with the default mode, does it ever really turn off? Because my understanding of it was that the researchers who kind of discovered the default mode network discovered that this was the part of your brain that's always active, even when you're totally at rest, not thinking about anything. So when we talk about in mindfulness, the silencing of the default mode, I was wondering if you could just clarify what is actually going on. Is it just that the default mode no longer prompts you for what you should do next? Like it no longer surfaces to your conscious attention, but it's still doing stuff? Or how would you understand that?
I think the short answer is probably. That it's probably the case that it's always at work. You never can unplug it. You can't remove those networks. And so there's always going to be some baseline activity. But there are times when it has to work especially hard, when it doesn't really know what you're trying to do. And in those times, you make its job easier by making it clear what it is you want to do. So if you have a schedule for things, even let's say, if you're just wanting to spend, say, some extended time in silent meditation, well, if you just sit down and try to be silent, your default mode isn't going to know what you're trying to do. It's just going to keep giving you things. So you'll experience its activity, right? So it's going to keep coming back. But I think that if you had looked forward to that time of meditation just once or twice in the hours leading up to it, kind of hoping for what it could be like, that would be enough to be signaling in advance. And then right before you start, try to start with high hopes of what that time of meditation can be like. That makes it easier for your default mode now to have the plan. And I think you'll find, this is my experience, much less distractible when I do that. There's also this quality, though, that our awareness is something that spans the brain itself. So and this is Ian McGilchrist, this idea that there are different ways of attending. So you're thinking about it in terms of right brain, left brain, that you can look at things more through the left brain, or you can look at things more through the right brain. Does that change the relative amount of activity in left and right? Not actually. They're both always active, but what you, like the person you experiences, is different depending on which one you're deliberately using. And if you're not deliberately using one, you probably then are going to default to the left. And it's the same with default attention and task attention. So one question is, how much does it intrude on your conscious awareness? And that might be a separate question then from how active is it in itself. So what we're trying to do here is talking about the shaping of, like, are you deliberately trying to anchor yourself in the present moment? Are you trying to develop a preference for attending to reality by grounding yourself in work and in relationships and the people around you, or simply in an act like meditating? So there could be these different objects. You're trying to make those more salient so that you desire attending to them more and more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then the last question I have on the default mode network, which, I mean, I don't even know if it's relevant to stonewalling, but I'll ask it anyway. So you mentioned that the default mode network, the thoughts are always self-referential in some way. Now, we often give the example with the default mode network of, like, you're working on a math problem, and then your default mode is just working on it in the background after you take a break. Then when you come back to it later, you get the reentry benefit, and it's maybe solved in the back of your mind. How is that a self-referential thought? It seems like in that case, the default mode network's content is like the problem that you were working on, so it's not really self-referential.
Yeah, maybe you could say that it's more likely to be working on your math problems than someone else's math problems. So there's always some kind of reference there to like what you're wanting to accomplish, what your goals are. And so it's always working on your priority, your goals, your way of your hierarchies.
But not necessarily your self-image.
Exactly. It might not be related to your self-image. Yeah. And so that's why it's not necessarily bad, because you could be doing lots of good things and have lots of good goals, and even being able to sit silently meditate for a period of time. And it can help you to do that in its own way.
Okay, great. I'm satisfied with that whole thing. So I think we put you to work. And so now let's maybe...
I like when people have feedback too. Yeah,
it's great. We love to talk about it and address it in our subsequent podcasts. So So, Kevin, maybe now we could move to contempt, which is this fourth stage that Dr. John Gottman identifies as the fourth horseman of the apocalypse.
And it's the one that he says is most predictive of divorce. So, and in a corporate setting, it would be the one most associated with someone having to leave the company, either of their own or or not their own will. And so it comes forth, and in some ways, like stonewalling, it is an escape strategy. So criticism is much closer to anger, and probably the emotion that we tend to experience when we're being critical of others would tend towards anger. And anger is an approach emotion. So it leads us to confrontation, which is also why it tends to be shorter lived. So it can come and go. So you have these flashpoints and then it's kind of gone. Stonewalling is a more general avoidance of the person, where now the person themselves is seen as a challenge. But that stonewalling doesn't yet have to be permanent. It could just be that that this person is not in the state of mind where you're going to have a good discussion. I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to get away. So it doesn't have the same negativity as contempt. And what makes contempt so difficult is that it implies a kind of permanence, that the other one has failings that are not able to be remedied. That is the dark part of contempt. So it means that there's always in contempt a giving up on the bond, a giving up on the other person. So, but in that sense, I also think that it does follow from stonewalling, because the more you're cut off from someone, the more you're going to be tempting yourself to fall into contempt. And if there's any reason not to use stonewalling as a tactic, it's because it can tempt you to contempt. Because without the real person there, you're just going to have the model you formed of them when they're probably at their worst, and you're going to be more likely to fall into it.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. So maybe just it's helpful for people to know, when we've now done, this is our 5th episode in this series, but every time I was thinking about contempt, I had in my mind an image of someone being like angry, and contempt is more like scorn or thinking the other person is not even worth your time. It's not necessarily like an intense negative reaction towards someone. It's almost like kind of neutral or calm, in the sense that it's just, you wouldn't even think of the person.
Yeah. So in that sense, contempt is a regulator of anger. And it's a scene in psychology. There are great researchers that write about contempt, and it's one of the lesser studied emotions, but it does seem to be an emotion. And then Fisher and the coworkers have a great review of it. I think it was 2016. But anyway, so they look at contempt across cultures. And a lot of the things do seem to fit with the way Gottman describes it. He talks about eye rolling, and hostile humor, sarcasm, name calling. The one thing that they say is most common across all cultures is the unilateral lip curl. There's this curl of one side of the lip. But also they talk about things like snorting, or tisking, or ha, or there's these different vocal signs that more go with contempt. So it's like one of the prods that can often get people to experience contempt is like, think of a kind of arrogant person, and imagine that person, you're hearing them taking credit for something they didn't do, and they're the ones taking credit for it. So that actually can, in most people, generate a little bit the feeling of contempt. But what Gottman is focused on is, and what I think is the missing context in a lot of the contempt research, is it has to be situated in bonds. Because contempt is like the rejection of the bond, because the person has been judged unworthy of it. right? And in that sense, contempt to me seems to be most opposite to love. And love being the bond, that we have with others because they're good and worthy of it. So it seems to be like love is a precisely opposite judgment. It has particular reference to the bond. More than, and contempt is more cold. Hate is much hotter than contempt. And hate probably has more optimism.
Now, when we were talking about earlier about defensiveness and criticism and so forth, it seems like you can be defensive in small ways or critical in some ways, and you can kind of start to notice, oh, I was just being defensive, and pull back. Let's try to fix that. But with contempt, is it possible that you would notice, okay, I'm just being a little bit contemptuous or kind of contemptuous, or does it always just signal the complete breakdown of the bond and like you're full on contempt, or is there like moderate contempt?
I think that the best interpretation of the literature is that contempt is a judgment that the other is unworthy of a bond. And in that sense, there are no small signs of contempt. So, you could imagine, I don't know, if you imagine like if someone was just about to propose to his, his girlfriend, and in the dinner, right before he's going to propose, he's like rolling his eyes at her. That's very small. It might be very subtle, but I don't think that would be healthy at all. And that would probably be a bad sign if there's like so early on these expressions of contempt. And because it's such an opposite disposition, and so contempt does speak to these deeper dispositions. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always fully deliberate or grave, and so some of these things, but if we notice ourselves doing them, then I think we have to like look and see, how do we reverse course? That there must be a way that we can somehow look again at the bond and the other person and try to we've gotten into a negative fixation. So in that sense, contempt as one of the four horsemen, I think contains the other three. It has all of them in it implicitly. But in this aspect is criticism. It has always this negative judgment, a negative fixation that probably says more about the person with contempt than the person for whom they have it. That it, just like criticism tends very often to be projection, I think contempt is similar.
Mm-hmm. So 2 questions on this. One is, let me just ask them both so I don't forget. One is, how do we kind of, if we notice, oh, I'm being contemptuous, what do we do? And then question number 2 is, how do we evaluate it in other people? Like, to know, is this person being contemptuous of me? Or if it's in a business context, is this employee perhaps being contemptuous of me or of the company in some way? And then if so, what do we do about that? So I guess the first question here is, how do we roll it back if we see it in ourselves?
So if we see it in ourselves, the more we are willing to kind of take responsibility for our own ability to grow, to own the opportunities for growth that are being presented, and so to see that if we're having some feelings of contempt, that probably where that all started was with being defensive, and to ask ourselves, has this person made us feel defensive? Okay, and then to see what are the really specific ways that we could be growing. So how could we be learning from this? Maybe this person is exactly the teacher that we need. They're the ones capable of showing us ways of growing that may be hard for us to do. So I think growth mindset seems to be kind of one of these deep kind of dispositions that makes it harder and harder for us to feel contempt at all. Because contempt always has a kind of permanence to it, that we're judging the other as fixed, but it also implies that we ourselves are fixed, that we don't see how we can, we don't see that we need to change. Well, that's defensiveness, right? If you I see no way for me to change, I see no way for me to grow, well, then maybe there are evident ways. And I would probably start with whatever we think the other person is doing that's so bad, and to see how are we doing that too. It could be that a moment of contrition and sincerity is enough to break the contempt in us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that growth mindset and fixed mindset both have two dimensions. One is like with fixed mindset, one could be, well, it's not, I can't get better at this. Like there's just no way for me to improve at this. But then the other is, I don't need to improve at this. And I think growth mindset can have basically the equivalent dimensions. So here we're talking about growth mindset in the sense, seeing that actually I do need to grow in this area, and I can grow, obviously, is kind of assumed there.
Yeah. And I think this, and so also then when it comes to like, if someone has contempt for us, we can ask, what have we done to make them defensive? So have we been critical of them? Have they been giving us feedback we have been unwilling to hear? That it can happen that people try giving feedback, that gets rejected repeatedly, and eventually they give up. And that shows itself as contempt. In the literature, it's not agreed that contempt is global. Some researchers think that it tends to be a judgment of how, like I was saying, how worthy are you of the bond? Others think that it could be that you've simply exasperated them. In some way you haven't been like reading their cues or getting their feedback. So to be more solicitous of what they would like to see from you, to show a willingness to change, that probably would be the most powerful thing, right? Because contempt always has this kind of giving up, despair quality to it. Well, if you go to the person and admit you could change, you would love to be able to, and you want their help in doing that, I don't think contempt can survive that. So while contempt, I think, has with this aspect of it of being the biggest predictor of divorce, I don't think it means that if there's contempt, the situation's hopeless. Far from it. If it's gotten so far that you can identify the contempt, probably there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, that can be gathered if you're just willing to hear what the other person's saying, to take seriously their point of view, to put yourself in their shoes. So, and both of those things get to this idea of letting go of defensiveness and letting go of criticism of the other. Recognize the good in the other and what they're saying and try to learn from them. See yourself capable of learning.
Yeah, Kevin, one thing that was interesting, you were mentioning a connection between this idea of contempt in Dr. Gottman, who's talking about it in the context of a marriage, and then also with Leonard Sachs, who's talking about it in the context of parenting. I don't know if you could explain that for us briefly.
Yeah, so Leonard Sachs has an updated version of The Collapse of Parenting that just came out in October of 24. And there, the main, his idea, I think, is that in our culture right now, what you see that affects parenting the most is basically a culture of contempt or disrespect. And he tells this story that this mother came to him. He's a pediatrician. And so his mother came to him. He's also a PhD psychologist. So he has good credentials. And he's been all over the world lecturing on parenting. So he gets all of this feedback. But mother came to him and said that her 8-year-old son has started changing his behavior radically towards her and her husband. And now he's being kind of contemptuous, disrespectful, talking back, smirking. And they have no idea where he's getting this from because they don't treat each other like that. So like, where is he getting it from? And Dr. Sachs' question was, does he watch the Disney Channel? And then she said, well, yes, he does. Does he watch Nickelodeon and Nick Jr.? Yes, he does. He said, that's the problem. Now, I haven't watched those channels in forever, but his point is that in all of pop culture, but as you see, especially in children's cartoons, and then any other thing that is targeting people under 18 in sitcoms, the entire idea is that is contempt for parents and teaching children that parents are not worth your time. They're not worth consideration. They're incompetent. They're probably morally bad. They're prejudiced. There's all these ideas that the parents are always seen in a bad light. Now, It's very dark, isn't it? Like if you're wanting to like ruin the bonds in a family, well, the way you would do that is you would train some people to have contempt for other people. But what a kind of destructive thing to be unleashing in the middle of households. So now, Dr. Sachs is not against all TV. He thinks that home and garden TV is fine. And the History Channel, he says, is mostly fine. But definitely not Disney and Nickelodeon and Nick Jr.
That's great. So now, Kevin, I'm curious because this thing of contempt, obviously in psychology and life generally, bonds are very important. I think we would say it's the most important thing. So if you're talking about contempt is like the most harmful thing towards a bond that you could possibly have, it seems like it should have come up before. So I'm interested, we've been doing this podcast for many years, and it kind of just came up with this exploration of Dr. John Gottman's work. So I'm wondering if it connects to other ideas we've discussed, just maybe not using that exact word, or does it come up a lot in your practice in terms of helping people to foster deeper bonds? Or
I feel like I've been coming around to it, to see the importance. And one of the ideas is, I've been focusing more lately on helping parents have confidence, in their role as a parent, and trying to be thinking through and working with people. Because there is I see it in my practice, and people ask me to speak at different events, and I see it, in the things they're asking me to talk about, that there is this interest in how do we, how can a parent feel confident about what how they're raising their children? And there has been a sense that parents, particularly fathers, have been singled out for contempt by the culture. So it's been something on my mind that I've been circling around, and thinking like, how can we, I think it'd be great if everything we do and that we do in optimal work, is useful, not just, in the workplace, but also in the home. And then what's the right way of encouraging? So this is like an ongoing project in my mind. But I felt like, these four horsemen really highlight the damage that can happen in bonds. And I think that is completely the case in business and educational settings, as well as then, of course, in the family setting. So I feel like I've been connecting these dots and trying to see how to bring it in. It does happen that I've worked with, with people where contempt, either suffering it from others or dishing it out to others, has been the main issue. So it has been on my mind. And it wasn't until I started seeing the connection with professional humility, and that if you can understand the four horsemen in terms of humility, now suddenly in my mind, it clicks with how optimal work can help people to grow. Because I think that everything we do in optimal work, it really does help people be more open to learning, more open to recognizing the good in others and being open to the contributions others have to make and being willing to listen and building bonds with others. So I really feel like we've been having this, I don't know, it's deeply in my mind. I want optimal work to help people to deepen how they live ideals and to deepen the bonds in their life, especially the most important bonds. So this, so it came back to me as this idea that the Gottman four horsemen really do tie in well to what we're doing.
Yeah, Kevin, well, we're basically out of time here today, and we're on, the last episode in the series on humility. So I'm wondering if you just have any final thoughts you want to end, not just this episode, but also the, 5-part series, not to, dramatize it too much, but.
Yeah, no, I think, like I was saying, that I believe that all the four horsemen are kind of contained in contempt, and all the virtuous dispositions we've been talking about, contrition and gratitude and the desire for the bond, they're all part of love. So they're all contained implicitly in love. And love is when we love someone, they become another self and their interests become our interests. And I think that happens in the family bonds and in relationships. But there's also a way that that happens in every workplace. There's a common good, a common project that unites everyone in a company, that in any institutional setting. And there is something deep about being committed with others to pursuing that. And I see contempt as being like on the side of total cynicism about the good that others seek, the good that you can corporately be seeking together. Cynicism is, I think, a disbelief in the possibility of a common good. Yeah, and I see everything we've been talking about here with real humility and leaders learning how to have more humility. The leader will let go of selfish motives and interests and make the collective, the common good, more the goal. But that's going to bring the entire team then closer together. So maybe we have to be thinking more also in optimal work. How do we just get this idea that the common good is what aligns us and allows us to transcend our own interests, where then now we all share these common interests together? That to me seems to be the ultimate form of flourishing.
Yeah, wow, Kevin, I really didn't see that tie-in coming with the common good. That was brilliant. So maybe we can do a follow-up episode on that then, or series maybe.
Yeah, cynicism and the common good. I think that could be another discussion.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks so much, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Sharif.
All right, we'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimwork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.